So this is part 4 in our final portion for chapter 54, and we were talking about the stability of a community. So first of all, reviewing that, stability of a community is the tendency for that community to reach and then maintain a relatively constant composition of the species diversity and its abundance. So there is a balance that is struck in some way. But sometimes there are disturbances. Those can be natural or they can be man-made disturbances that change that balance in some way. And so once that occurs, then there needs to be then the reestablishment of the community. And so the way that that occurs depends on what type of disturbance has occurred. So if the disturbance was something, for example, like the movement or retreat of a glacier or the eruption of a volcano, when the actual community is brought down to even the soil being removed, so everything is wiped out, and we have basically a lifeless palette to build upon, then we have what's called primary succession take place. So that has to begin with a lifeless area, and also there is no soil, so that even the soil with its nutrients has been removed. So in primary succession, what has to occur is soil must first be made, and so that's going to occur through organisms like bacteria, lichen, mosses, and then following that, there'll be grasses, and then shrubs and trees that slowly build up a foundation for that community to succeed. If the soil hasn't been removed, but the community has still been cleared out, so it's been removed in some way, for example, with a forest fire, but the soil is still intact, we have secondary succession. So the burning actually in a forest fire releases nutrients that were formerly locked up in the tissues of trees. So what happens in secondary succession is much quicker. There's a regrowth and a repopulation of the community in a much more timely fashion when there's secondary succession because you do have nutrients in the soil available. So this is an example of a succession of species. We end up with what the first one is the pioneer species of lichen and moss. And then we can have the grasses and then bushes and trees. And then we have what's called a climax forest, which is the balanced, stable community. What causes succession? Again, we have both natural and man-made causes. But it makes sense that when we have the beginning of a new community, we need the early species to be R-selective, which means, again, that they're going to have a lot of offspring in a very quick fashion, but not necessarily that they're going to survive long and have a long lifespan, because we want there to be then new species introduced. So the first early species are generally going to be R-selected and be tolerant of harsh conditions. These early species will act as facilitators. So if you remember back to our term facilitation, in that they're going to provide a benefit to other species even though they may not have direct contact with them. So they're going to change the soil's pH, for example, or put back nutrients into the soil, create soil. They may even change the level of light that comes down to the different plants. And they, again, because they are selected, they often will be outcompeted. once we get to the end of the succession, we get that climax forest. And what that's going to look like, we're going to have a plant community dominated by trees. This is the final stage of natural succession for a specific ecosystem. And it's going to be characterized by having stable plant community, and the species composition will reach this balance point so that it stays in a relatively stable abundance and diversity stage. And then again, stability is defined as the tendency of a community to reach and maintain a relatively constant composition of species despite the disturbance. So I've talked about volcanoes and forest fires, but we also have human disturbance occurring. So humans actually have the greatest impact on biological communities if we look at what's going on around the world. Both on land and in the oceans, there is human disturbance, which actually throws everything off balance. And the example that I have in this picture here is trawling. So when ships trawl the ocean, you can see a healthy ecosystem or community there with the coral and the diversity of fish there on the top. But that same area, once trawling has occurred, is completely wiped out. So we've gone down to the point where there has to be a succession. There's still soil there, so we could have a secondary succession to repopulate that community. But without any further disturbances, so that it could actually thrive and get back to a balanced state. So that is, in essence, the important points in Chapter 54. Make sure you look at some of the examples that are in your book and of the different topics that I've brought up in this lecture. Look at an example of secondary succession, what actually happens in a rough order in the different models of succession. And then also make sure that you know some different examples of the different types of interspecific relationships that you see in a community. And that's it.